All right. Good morning.
Ready?
Well, it's 1 minute after 10, and we're going to continue to welcome folks in the door. And all right.
Yeah.
And if you haven't already said good morning, oh, from InSource, hey, welcome, Sarah.
Good morning.
Fantastic. Well, good morning. I'm Alisa Stovall, and I'm here with my colleague Jessica Binhack, and we're happy to be with you this morning. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about developing behavior intervention plans. I'll tell you just a teeny bit about myself, and then I'm going to invite Jessica to do the same thing as some folks are still coming in the door. Been doing this a long time, this work around behavior and problem solving around student behaviors and sometimes around adult behaviors. And it's something that I really enjoy doing. It's, the problem solving part of it, the seeing the success that students are making because their teachers are supporting them. That's something that gets me up in the morning. And it's been about, 35 years now I've been getting up in the morning to talk about behavior or to be involved. I've been in a classroom setting. I've been in a self-contained K-5 classroom for students with emotional disabilities. I have worked in alternative education, same kids, just a little bit older, all the way through high school. I have been a consultant. I have been an administrator, supervising all the programs of a district. And the thing I guess I've enjoyed all that and I continue to enjoy is being able to do these kinds of things in the consultant role where we can bring you resources and problem solve with you and talk about behavior. So Jessica.
Hi. Hi, my name is Jessica Binhack. I am coming up on a year at the Indiana IEP Resource Center. My career has always kind of been in special education. I started my career in Chicago Public Schools. I've done everything from self-contained to resource to inclusion. And recently my career has kind of moved in the direction of more behavior support as a behavior consultant and an intervention specialist. So I've worn a lot of different hats. But yeah, I think it's been about like 12, 13 years I've been in education. So I'm excited to continue this journey with Indiana IEPRC and support educators. So yeah, if we're ready to get going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got some materials for you that we want to make sure that you can get a hold of. And on the next screen, you'll see there is a link as well as a QR code that will take you to our Padlet. That is where you will find the slides for our session. And this is a smaller session. We do a day-long session, but since we're not going to be together online for 5 hours, we thought we might shorten this up a little bit so we don't lose anybody along the way. That'd be a long time to be online, but we've done that, haven't we, in our recent past. So use the codes here and to pull up a session that or session materials that were designed for the virtual session. You're welcome to pull down both sets, because there is more information in the other, but we're going to abbreviate this a bit for you. So know that those tools are there on the Padlet. And actually, let's see. Well, we'll go there in a minute, maybe from our shared screen.
And Friday, I sent you guys an email that has that link in it as well, and the guided notes for the session too. So they have that access as well, Lisa.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been a great tool to have. So that's where you can get materials. We're actually going to be going there to do a couple of activities before our time is up. And we've got to thank you for sending things out ahead of time. That's really appreciated. We're glad that that meets your needs. But I do want to just briefly talk about our norms for a group, since we're sharing some space together here. We do intend it to, we start on time and we intend to end on time. We really want you to be an engaged participant, and we understand that virtual is we're getting used to it, but it's not always our favorite way to engage with each other. So there'll be opportunities, excuse me, for you to drop something in the chat. Actually, you can do that at any time. We'll be monitoring that. when we're not speaking, and trying to keep up with your ideas and thoughts. So do share those. There'll be some time to look at some resources. There'll be time to do some reflecting on your own. And so we just want you to know that, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you need. Don't hesitate to put something into the chat to share out, okay, or the other tools that we're going to be using.
All right.
I guess that's about it.
Yeah.
Our goal is to bring you a little more information. This may be a review for some of you. It may be brand new for some of you. That's okay. We're always somewhere in that learning curve. And along with kind of moving through the working parts of this process, we hope to expand your collection of resources as well. That's important. So.
All right, on your guided notes, sorry, before you get started, there's a little opportunity to do some reflection. It's at the top of the directions. If you want to take maybe 2 minutes or so to go through and kind of reflect on, it's a KWL. So what do you know about FBAs and BIPs? What do you want to know? And then at the end, we'll revisit and maybe be able to share like what we've learned, or make sure that your questions were answered throughout this process. So I'm going to give you about a minute or two to go ahead and do that quick reflection. Well, hopefully you've had an opportunity to go through and do a quick reflection. You can always revisit it throughout the training, but we're gonna get started.
Okay, well, so here's our agenda. We're already on our way with the logistics of the day, but we're going to spend some time around that functional behavior assessment piece first, give you a little bit of practice time, then we'll come back and give some more information in regards to developing that behavioral intervention plan based on the functional behavior assessment, and a little more practice time, and then the sharing of resources. And we're really going to try to embed the resource piece within everything that we do, just to make sure we get that information out to you. If there is a question that you have, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. We'll again be monitoring all that, but that's kind of the plan for our time together.
All right. All right, so we're going to jump right in with the FBA. The first thing is a functional behavior assessment. And we'll cover like, what is that FBA? Why do we conduct those? When do we conduct an FBA? How do we conduct that FBA? And then a little time for some practice. And then we do the behavior intervention plan. So what is a BIP? How do we create that BIP? When do we do that BIP? How do we progress monitor those? And then a little bit of practice time. So hopefully you'll have this two-part process, a better understanding of it by the end. All right.
Okay, and as we get started with this, we're coming from different parts of the state and different sets of procedures and understandings of this process. And at the Resource Center, we've really like to encourage you to consider how you could do this process with a team. I've been in case conferences where everybody turns and looked at me and said, okay, Lisa, you write the plan, we'll get back with you and see how things are going. And there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a real need to do a deep dive into developing your intervention plan. And it can be helpful to have team members, those that have varied experiences with the student. I want to know about somebody that has a great relationship, and I want to know about the rocky ones too. Having a multidisciplinary group, what you bring from your professional knowledge, as well as your classroom knowledge or your knowledge of working with that individual, that's valuable. Having the student voice included in that, you almost can't do it without in some way having the student's voice reflected in this process, because we're aiming to get to the function of the behavior that the student is using. And there could be a lot of moving parts to that. So we want to be comprehensive. And doing it by myself was really difficult and challenging. I may have come up with some decent ideas, but having that team approach to kind of, push back and discuss and really take a deep dive into why this behavior, why in this place, that was important. And we believe that it continues to be an important piece of this. And if you're talking about a student with an IEP, you've got a case conference committee that can support you in this, and you can always pull in other members. If you don't, it's worth thinking about who's talking about kids and behavior, who's talking about, who can help me look at this student, look at the behaviors we're seeing, give me the view from afar, particularly if I'm the person working with the student, or bring other perspectives, including parent perspectives, which I hadn't mentioned as a part of the team. So something to consider. And some potential teammates might be, and I think we had a long list. You can see roles on there from community members, from school building members, from family members, support personnel. There should always be someone on this team that's talking about this student's behavior that has positive rapport with the student. And if we look around the room or around the building and we can't find anyone who has positive rapport with the student, that's probably where we need to begin. Someone's establishing a relationship with the student. So just some potential students that you might think about. Okay. And what we're going to ask you to do using our chat is to start with just thinking about what are the challenges of if we're going to create a team and bring a team together to do this, what are the challenges? And here's what I'd like for you to do before you hit send or post from that chat. Send. I'm sending mail now. I want you just to type in what you believe is a barrier to working as a team. Don't hit the send button yet, but just type it in. I'm going to give you a couple seconds. You may have a couple ideas. You can put them in the same strand. And then when I say count to 3, I want you everybody to hit send at the same time, so we can just see what shows up in the chat together. And I hope there's some ideas. Okay, so you ready? You've got an idea in regards to what are the challenges of meeting as a team in your space right now. 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, look at that.
Teacher behavior towards students.
Getting staff to meet.
Oh yeah, that unified time
constraints,
scheduling.
limited staff, opposite points of view. Okay, so we've got, there are a lot of moving parts. Scheduling. Ugh. Yeah, being on the same page.
A lot of the, just having teachers with the right mindset of going into that meeting.
I don't want to talk about him. Make him go away.
Yeah. Same page. Yeah.
So we've got, we're thinking about the same things. Those time getting people together. Is it the right group? Who needs to be there? Those are all challenges. What might be some solutions if you've been in that situation? Before we share anything, we want to hear from you. What might have been solutions that you found to the barriers that have been indicated here? and just drop those into the chat as well. What do you do about the time constraints? How do you address the opposite points of view? Drop those in the chat. I'm waiting for somebody to say, well, that's why we're here, because we're expecting to hear from you guys about this. But
I know.
Oh,
Jeannie, we're going to learn all of that today.
Keep talking, ladies, keep talking so we can learn. Yeah, that having an agenda, a set time for collaboration,
yeah,
and we know how hard it is to get things done during, that you need to do on your schedule every day, but adding more flexible dates and times.
Making sure that you're listening to all those points of view. Yeah, especially when we have teachers that or when we have people that struggle with that student, giving a little bit of grace to hear their point of view often gets them more involved in the discussion process.
Well, they're all very real pieces to consider, but when you talk about having time to get together, one of the things that comes to mind is that what groups are already meeting to talk about your students? Do you have a grade level team that meets to talk about where we're going in the next unit? Do you have data meetings around test scores? Some are even saying that they don't have any meetings that, which is the reality of where we are right now. Yeah. But if you think about it, if you've already got meetings that are happening in your building or across your district, you might add a piece of the conversation that includes behavior, because behavior is part of our academic skill repertoire as well. And maybe it's just, how are our fifth graders doing with not only the writing process and developing essays, but how are they doing with managing themselves in the cafeteria or moving around the building responsibly? It might be a place, what are our expectations for those learners? What are our expectations behaviorally for that same group of learners? And weave that in. So then when there's a concern, you've got a baseline group that at least you can get some, a little bit of information, even if it's not something that's ready to go to the seriousness of a behavior plan. It might be worthy of, we're all having trouble with the fifth grade boys, doing this or that. How do we tackle that? What can we do in the interim and support all of our learners? Or when something rises to the top, and this is way beyond typical fifth grade behavior or second grade behavior and so on. It's just something to consider in how we do what we do and making sure we can connect when we need to talk about behaviors of concern. Because that's where we go next, yes. The beginning of this process.
All right. So when we talk about there's a behavior of concern, this page on the IEP can sometimes seem a little daunting when we come up to it. So when we're discussing the student and their behavior, often like we note that in our present levels, because that's kind of part of that student profile of, what's going on with this student behaviorally. And when we note that there is a behavior of concern and what it looks like when we get to this page, we're going to acknowledge that and say, yes, there is a behavior of concern, because that's something that our case conference committee needs to discuss. So think of all those teammates, the people that interact with this student that have provided information about that behavior of concern. So then we talk about that. So what kind of behaviors rise to the level of bringing a behavior to the team? Because some things we can just manage on our own in the classroom or with that student, but other times the behavior we need more support around it. So these are behaviors that remove the student from instruction. They're no longer part of that lesson or in the classroom or in the school building. So when a student is removed and they don't have access to that instruction, that is a behavior of concern.
Okay. Can I just yeah, to kind of bring that home, many times the first step of what we do is go back to your seat. You can listen from there the rest of the group is going to be over here working on this, and we kind of excuse the student. When the student's away from the immediate lesson, they may be checked out. And so even though, and if that happens often, they're missing quite a bit of instruction. And while we think we're still keeping them in the classroom, they're still a part of they actually aren't. And so, just a warning that we need to be careful of, how often does that really happen, that a student is sent away from the working group or the instructional lesson, and you can listen from your desk, because that really doesn't happen as well as we would think it would in regards to learning and retaining instruction. So, sounds benign, but it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it definitely impacts their engagement in the lesson. Speaking of engagement, if it's dangerous or harmful to others, if the behavior, turns the classroom community into an unsafe place, or it's unsafe for that student, that is a behavior of concern. Isolation, so kind of going back to a little bit of what Alisa said, or if that student doesn't have access to their gen ed peers or any of their peers because their behavior impacts that opportunity, that is another behavior of concern. Regularly interrupts the instruction flow. If you can't get through a lesson because the student's behavior is impacting that, that's a behavior of concern. And then lastly, but definitely there's other pieces around it, it pulls themselves or others off task. I know we probably have quite a few of those kiddos in our classrooms right now, but making sure that our kids can engage in the instruction and what they're doing in the classroom is really important. So if we have students that are pulling themselves off task or others, that's impacting their access to instruction or activities in the classroom, which then affects achievement as well. So these are all, if you have these types of concerns, then we need to bring that to the case conference committee, because we should start planning around how do we support this student. And when we support that student, we're helping build a classroom community that is safe, cooperative for all students, where everybody can learn. So we have to ask ourselves through this process, because like I said earlier, it could just be this little behavior that you can manage. Is it really a behavior of concern? So are we all addressing that? Some questions we would ask ourselves is, are we all addressing the same behaviors? Oftentimes when we come together as that case conference committee and people that work with that student, we can describe it in different ways. So eloping to one teacher may be leaving the classroom, but to another teacher, it could be just leaving their seat. Thinking about, hitting other students, is it a punch, or is it a slap, or is it an elbow? What is the common way that we're labeling that behavior? Because if you're saying it's a slap and someone else is saying it's a punch, those are two different definitions of what the behavior looks like. So coming to that common definition or what it looks like is really important, especially as you move into the data collection process, because you want to be collecting the same information. And go ahead, Alisa.
I was just saying, this is a great tool that we're going to offer as a resource. If we had all day together, we'd play with a little bit more. But the National Center for Intensive Intervention has a tool, and it's referenced on this screen, where you can take back to your school, to your team, to your leadership, and say, maybe we need to define more clearly some of the behaviors that we're talking about. Because if we define it in observable, measurable, and clearly identifiable terms, everybody knows it when they see it. And the other piece of that, not just knowing when we see it, once we've defined it this way, we can explicitly teach what we want students to do other than this behavior, the behaviors that are acceptable in this space. So we can teach the yes, which is what I used to call it in the classroom. This is the no, but this is the yes. You cannot do this, but you can do this. And that clarifies for students, what does it look like? What does it sound like? When can I do it? As opposed to being very unclear and saying, I told you to stay in your seat. Well, is it stay in your seat or stay in your area? or stay in the room, or, because those are very different behaviors for some learners, and we need to clarify that and reinforce. And that helps us when it comes to sending issues outside of our classroom to be resolved with school leadership too. And but this takes us back to, and if you want to show the rest of that resource, there's also a take-home piece of this where you can work with really in-depth identifying other behaviors that you want to make sure are clear with your staff. But that's on the Padlet, this particular activity, and you're welcome to take a look at that. But what does this have to do with the behavior of concern? Well, this helps us to be able to describe it clearly. And my favorite definition of a description of behavior of concern comes from one of our consultants that's worked with us, and Terrence Scott. He always says, you need to describe it to me so well that I could act it out. So, if I'm talking about Jimmy D howls all the time, I need to make sure that I'm going to get the pitch right. So he knows exactly what, this is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. And if I can describe it and he can do it, then we're both understanding what that behavior looks like. And I'm not encouraging you to use the behavior you don't want in your classroom, but it's very important that we describe it. What does it look like? What is it? Where does the behavior happen? When does it happen? How often is it happening? What's the intensity? It's kind of light, or is it really, heavy and aggressive, and I always said dark, either dark or light. Kids seem to understand that. Are you angry to the middle of your stomach or to the top of your head? Because if all of you is angry, that sends a different message. But being able to truly identify, clearly, this is the behavior of concern, so that we all know what it is: observable, measurable, identifiable. Because what comes next in the process for a student with an IEP is the question of, does the pattern of the student's behavior impede his or her learning or that of others? And if I'm not sure, we have to have a real understanding of, is there a pattern to this behavior? When does it happen? Does it always happen at these times and it never happens at other times? How is it impeding? Is it stopping this student's learning? Is it stopping everyone's learning? How long does it last? Okay, that question, does the pattern of the student's behavior impede his or her learning or that of others, is a call to action, depending on how we answer that question. It may be that we know the student, and if we just make a slight adjustment in the schedule, we're going to move his locker from the second floor with the other fifth graders to the first floor wing, and change his pattern of traveling through the building. Maybe that's all we need to do. So that's what we're going to do. As long as we document it and its effectiveness, that becomes data. Okay. Maybe it's something where we need to think about, if he just knew how to do this one piece, if we could just coach him, teach him this one piece, he could do this repertoire of skills. And so we focus on that piece, and we can decide to do that again, document if it made an impact or not. It may be that we get to a point where we know, no, this is really bigger than anything that we can manage by making slight adjustments or putting an accommodation in place. So now we need to take that documentation and make a decision about yes or no, is this behavior, the pattern of this behavior, impeding the student's learning? And I think we have Mitchell, who's one of the, his quote, so yep, there it is, because it's an important one. The case conference determines if the pattern behavior impedes learning, and I've said that. But the team shall, in the case of a child whose behavior does impede, consider when appropriate strategies, including positive behavioral interventions, strategies, and supports to address that behavior. So we can't not do anything if we believe that this is an issue. These behaviors are interfering. And at that point, we begin to look towards the functional behavior assessment.
And remembering that, kind of going back to what Alisa said, on this slide is that this is a process that you can do, you know, when we put in those environmental supports or those interventions or those pieces that we put together, when we kind of brought up that behavior of concern, that's things that we're trying before we get to that FBA process. So it can be it's part of that. These are opportunities to build in your data collection of understanding what really works for this kiddo. And then, so just a little like the prior piece to it. So when we talk about what is that functional behavior assessment, and it's a process that uses data to identify those patterns in student behavior. When we don't know what the function is, we've put in interventions, we've tried to figure out, you know, what drives this student's behavior, and we can't figure out, then we would use this assessment to help drive that. So a functional behavior assessment, it might require the written parental consent if it's in a VAL that is defined in section 30, but this is through Article 7, so we could go into that a little bit more later. But parental consent is not required when a functional behavior assessment reviews the existing data. So you only need parental consent if you're getting new data for the FBA. But if you're just using existing data, which we'll go over later, then you can do it without parental consent.
Except that the parent, particularly with an IEP team, the parent is a part of the IEP
Yes.
team. And if we're discussing it, they should be part of that discussion.
Yes.
So in a perfect world, that would always happen, right?
Yes. Yeah. You've got that case conference community or committee and the parent. Yeah, you're right. They're going to know about these things, even when you're putting in these changes for like interventions through those environmental supports or accommodations, the SDI, that's changing the IEP. So they're going to be part of that discussion. So we move on to like, when do we conduct this FBA? Like what step do we get to, or what do we use to make that decision? So when we're not sure why those behaviors are occurring, when it's required by Article 7, and there are a few pieces that identify what that requirement is. And then when we need new data to inform the existing behavior intervention plans, you put in these supports and you can't figure out what's going on. So we need to gather more information to, you know, better understand and build a plan to support this student and enhance their positive educational experience. So then we need to know that why question, why, and we're going to those Article 7 requirements right there. So we do an FBA to determine the eligibility for an emotional disability when it is the conduct is determined to be a manifestation of a student's disability. So when we go to those manifest determination meetings, and you know, if it's connected, then we need to do an FBA as appropriate when it's determined not to be a manifest of the student's disability. So that if it's not related to their disability, you don't have to do it, but it's definitely an opportunity as it's appropriate, because we're still trying to figure out how to support that student. Same with if they've been removed to an interim alternative ed setting. So we're looking at those really serious behaviors, weapons, drugs, seriously bodily injury, because we want to address that behavior violation, because we don't want it to reoccur. We want our kids to have access to their education. And then to inform that development of the BIP. So if we know the function and what's going on, and we have data around all these interventions and where it's happening and all these different pieces, it's going to help us build a behavior intervention plan that is well-rounded to really support the student in their environment and help them have access, and their peers have access to a free and appropriate education. So then we kind of move into the why question again. So why do we need these? And we've kind of gone over it a little bit already, but those BIPs are so much stronger when it's supported by a functional behavior assessment. That doesn't mean that you go in immediately to an FBA when you're through this process, but you know, doing that problem solving piece. But then when we really need to build a BIP because we're not sure what's going on, the FBA helps us build that stronger piece around it. We have so much more information, so much more data. This example down here, I think we've probably seen quite a bit of it, or some of us have in some way, shape, or form, but a student stands up and dances in the middle of class, we remove them to the hallway to remove them from the audience or the attention. So we're thinking, oh, this student just wants attention, right? But if the function of behavior was not attention, but escape, so not having to be there, we've now strengthened behavior because they know if they stand up and dance in the middle of class, they know that they're going to be removed, and we're, supporting that that function for them. So they know that that's what they can do to get out of being there. So knowing that function, which changed the behavior intervention plan, because removal wouldn't be supportive to providing that student with the correct replacement behaviors and how to support them.
Mhm. Dr. Tim Lewis, who works in behavior and has done so for years, talks about don't feed the function, don't feed the function.
Yes. Yes. And if we don't know that function, then we could be inadvertently feeding it and not knowing so.
Mhm.
So, there we go. So there is a general process in the FBA piece. So we're identifying those areas of concern in specific terms. We talked about that earlier, being really, what's going on? Let's bring it to the team. Let's be really specific about what we're seeing or what those concerns are. And then we narrow those down, because it could be a whole plethora of things, especially if we have a case conference committee that comes around and they've all got different concerns. Let's narrow those down. Let's get those definitions that really define, like, what does it look like? Where is it happening? All of those pieces. And then we go into that existing data piece. There may be a ton of different data, and we'll go into that in a minute. Determine the need for additional data. If that existing data that's been provided isn't enough, we will decide, okay, we need more to help provide us more information for the functional behavior assessment. Analyze it and create that hypothesis for the function of behavior. You guys are scientists, right? You do that whole hypothesis things. I know you probably remember it from science classes and, throughout your educational career of putting that science cap on, and you're testing hypotheses and you're making these educated guesses. And then you're going to determine, do we need to collect additional data to support or refute the hypothesis? How do we know that this is the best hypothesis for what we know the function of behavior is? And is there data that says, we're not sure, we probably need to figure things out a little bit more? And then we revise it if it's needed. But you may hit that hypothesis the first time, and that's fantastic. But the FBA is really meant to help, really make sure that we know what the function of behavior is.
Mm-hmm. And if you see that little sun, that yellow sun that was in the corner of that slide, yes, that's just a designation that's one of the handouts that, or materials that you should either already have pulled down or can pull down from the Padlet. But don't worry that you won't be able to see that information again.
Yes. Yeah, our Padlet information stays on there, so you'll always have access to it.
Yeah, and I just dropped the link to the Padlet into the chat again, because we're probably going to go there.
Yeah.
Oh, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So do you want to, so really quick, just kind of gathering information. Do you want to kind of
go ahead. Go ahead and finish that up. I just wanted to point out that little sun on the corner.
Yes, thank you. So there, like we talked about, there are two different kinds of data that can be gathered through this process. Some existing data might be Class Dojo. You guys might use some other different type of parent communication or points thing, whatever your school-wide expectation is. Attendance, that's stuff that's already collected, office referrals, nurse visits, classroom performance data. Remember earlier, Alisa was talking about those meetings you may have where you dive into data about what's going on in the classroom, what's going on school-wide, what's all our data, that piece, like that information is also helpful for existing data to help guide or help us understand that student. Existing behavior charts. And then there might be some other things too that you guys could share out. New data, rating scales, interviews with the parent, student, and teachers. That's really making sure that you're bringing that committee piece and that student voice. This is a great way to get a lot of that student voice information. Checklists, observations, reinforcement surveys. You know, what is this kiddo working for? What is going to reinforce them using the replacement behavior to use it to get that expected behavior in that environment? Settings, events, checklists, ABC charts, and other. So there are other options or other ways that you can gather new data. So, right. And then we move on to here are some really great data collection pieces. These are all in our Padlet, but Margaret Searle has this really wonderful root cause chart that's helpful to guide our, problem solving process. The direct behavior rating scales. A lot of your school psychologists may have a lot of these rating scales already, but these are resources for you to use. There's different functional assessment interviews like reinforcement surveys. There's definitely some for like elementary, middle school, high school, but making sure that you've got some age appropriate ones is a smart thing. There's group interviews that Dr. Terrence Scott has shared out. Data collection methods. Sometimes we just don't really know where to start with data collection. How do we do that? And what kind of data are we going to collect? And then Lives in Balance has some really good educator resources for you to use as well. So these are all kind of examples of data to collect throughout this
Do we have some time for them to take a look?
Yes. Yeah, go for it.
Sweet. Okay.
All in the Padlet. How much time, Alisa?
Maybe just, if you see one that looks like you want to take a look, we'll give you maybe three or 4 minutes, nothing more than 5. We just want to give you a teaser. But if you go to the Padlet, you'll find these tools and click on one, take a look, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. And if you find one that seems like something you could use, drop that in the chat.
Yeah, or if you have other data collection pieces that you use for existing data or new data, go ahead and drop that in the chat. You guys are experts and you are resources to each other. So being able to share that information is very helpful to your colleagues. A few minutes to check those out. you had a little bit of time to look through those resources on our Padlet, if you want to drop in the chat, just, what tools did you review, or did you look at all of them, or just one or two? You can also share some that you've used or you would consider using or adding as part of your FBA data collection process. Give you guys a little bit of time.
Is there anything there that you might want to take a second look at, a closer look, and see if it might be helpful?
I've used a lot of the interviews for teachers and parents and the student to help guide information. Oh, Ellen looked at Margaret Searle's piece.
Yeah, kind of drilling down into the skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the student voice too.
Yeah. Kira got into the functional assessment interview. Yeah, the IRIS modules are amazing. If you want to do a little more of a deep dive into this whole process, the IRIS modules out of Vanderbilt are excellent modules to work through. All right. You guys can keep dropping those into the chat. We're going to move forward. All right, so we're back to that general process. We've kind of worked through the area of concern, narrowing down those concerns, reviewing that existing data, and we've talked about gathering that additional data and what kind of data that might be. So, and like I said, that we have that handout out there. So we're going to think about specific things. So when you're bringing that case conference committee together and you're meeting with teachers and you're getting all this information, you want to think about what questions would you want to ask the teacher. We want to be intentional about the type of information that we gather from those that are a part of this process, and then thinking about what other existing data you might want to review. So if you want to drop into the chat as we move through this, what questions would you want to ask the teacher about getting more specific? And what data would you want to review? All right, so in the email that was sent last week, there was a data sheet about a student named Sammy. We're going to use this data sheet throughout the training. It just so that you can go back and reference it throughout this practice process. So we're going to talk about this first piece. So Sammy, I'm going to read it aloud for you guys, but you're more than welcome to read aloud or read to yourself or either on your sheet or here. But Sammy's a 5th grade student in Mr. Kennett's class. Mr. Kennett has concerns about Sammy's in-class behavior. He describes Sammy as oppositional and non-compliant. At the start of the year, Sammy was somewhat compliant, but has increased over the last few months. Sammy also sometimes crumples up work, puts his head on his desk, and is off task. So maybe taking that information and thinking about what specific questions do you want to ask Mr. Kennett about Sammy? And then also thinking about what initial existing data you'd want to review about Sammy while they bring up this behavior of concern. So is there any, just speaking of existing data, these are some examples of information that we can pull about Sammy. Do you guys want to share any other data that you might, that might already be available to you as a teacher? Trying to think. Maybe I'm thinking like Class Dojo might be helpful to them. Right. While you're thinking of those things, we're gonna keep moving forward. Got a lot of stuff to cover during this webinar. Ooh. Ellen says that she checks parent contacts pretty intentionally. I think that's really huge. Like, how often is that communication piece? That's good. All right. So here's our second data set. After we've kind of been more intentional about the questions that we are asking and what existing data to gather, Mr. Kennett shared that the student's been sent to the office 7 times this year for ripping up and crumpling work. He does not have any existing data on individual prompts he has given Sammy. He believes he's missed multiple recess times to complete work. He's reached out to his mom 3 times this semester, but is not connected. Sammy's struggling in reading, math, and writing, but previous iLearn has shown that he's near grade level. Sammy's attendance is good, but frequently goes to the nurse for mild complaints like a headache or stomach ache. A check with the nurse shows that at least 15 visits this year, and always returning to class after about 15 minutes of lying down. So we've asked some intentional questions about what's it, when is it happening? Have you contacted mom? Which Ellen brought up as the communication piece. We brought in that academic information, even asked like, how many times are you at, prompting Sammy? So this is all really good information that help guide more questions into what's going on with Sammy. All right, on to that data set 3. I know you've got a lot to take in right now. So after asking more intentional questions with Mr. Kennett, he provided more descriptions of the oppositional and non-compliant behavior. We talked about earlier how it's so important for us to come to a common understanding and a common definition of what these things look like with all of the people that work with Sammy or with the student. He explained that when he gives instructions to the class to begin work, Sammy does not begin. When prompted individually, Sammy sometimes will begin. Other times he'll put his head on the desk or crumple up work or tear it and throw it on the floor. Sometimes Sammy just sits and does not show any response. He's generally compliant with other kinds of requests like line up, return to your seat, etc. So this kind of tells us like what's going on when we're seeing this behavior, what it looks like, when it's happening. When we pull that information, we know, he's fine most of the time when he's got, lining up or return to your seat, but there are some specific times where he tends to struggle with being compliant and and we now know what it looks like, or more information around what it looks like. So now that Mr. Kennett's brought all this information and it's been more specific and he has more accurate terms about what it looks like, we're going to talk about our initial concerns. So we're bringing up that Sammy is oppositional, non-compliant, off task. He's destroying work, like by tearing it up and crumpling it and throwing it on the floor and putting his head down. So he may just refuse by putting his head down. There may be some different other pieces. But after we talked with Mr. Kennett and we've gotten more information, we know that when he's given work, because it's during that work time, it's initiating those work tasks. He needs prompts to get started. And sometimes he'll work. And then other times, we see that destroying or tearing up work. And then we're also noticing that he's seeing the school nurse for headaches and stomach aches. So that's him leaving the classroom. So it's giving us more information about what's going on in like what it looks like when we're narrowing down those concerns. So we ask ourselves, where should we start with this information? Where are we going next with it? So we're going back to that gathering more data for the student. We might need more information around Sammy. We don't know what's going on with all these pieces. So we might get some other data to provide more information. So we're looking at maybe we need to send home some rating scales. It does sound like Mr. Kennett's reached out to the parent to connect, but he hasn't had a lot of support with that. But gathering those interviews with the parent, the student, maybe other teachers that Sammy sees in his school environment, checklists, observations, having someone come in and be able to see what's going on. That's why it's so important to define what it looks like so that people that can come in and observe what's going on are able to see those behaviors and not just kind of guess what's going on. Non-compliance to Mr. Kennett can look different than non-compliance from me. So making sure that we know exactly what we're looking for. a reinforcement inventory. What can we get Sammy? What makes him tick? What does he want to reinforce as expected behaviors? That setting events checklist, ABC charts, that antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Do you guys have any other ideas of more data that we can gather about Sammy? Go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll monitor that as we go. All right, more data about Sammy because we're moving through that process to gather more. So we collected data for 2 weeks and it showed that his behavior occurred when work tasks were given that were reading, math, or writing, and were new or somewhat new. No behaviors occurred during the review activities or art-based tasks. There was no pattern related to the time of day, teacher initiating the request, or day of the week. Behaviors were only seen in the classroom. No refusals were occurring after requests in unstructured settings or following requests that were not an academic task related. So we're taking in all this information to help us understand more when it's happening and where it's happening. Mr. Kennett seemed to get a hold of the parent. When he interviewed him, it showed that similar behaviors are occurring at home when working on homework. Interview with the previous teachers, your teacher showed that mild similar behavior was happening last year, but no tearing up of work. It took lots of encouragement and prompting to get Sammy to complete that academic work last year. So we're taking all this information in and we're pulling the, we're kind of getting an idea of what's going on with Sammy. So we've got more data. Data is so important throughout this whole process. So more data. We didn't do any rating scales as no off-task behavior was reported across the settings. But 2 classroom observations were completed. During the observations, we did some ABC data, antecedent, behavior, consequence. During those instances where the teacher was transitioning the class to in-class seat work, Sammy frequently began becoming outwardly anxious prior to instruction or requests and during whole class practice items. Sammy would put his head on the desk or begin looking around the room and showed more seat movement. Body posture changed as the teacher passed out papers. The teacher generally followed any failure to begin working with an individual verbal prompt followed by a physical prompt, so tapping on the behavior or the paper. And then on occasion where Sammy tore up the paper, he was sent to the office to cool off. We've got a lot more information about what's going on in the classroom with Sammy. All right, data set 6. He was interviewed to find out additional information to identify possible reinforcers. So this is that student interview piece. He hates school. It's too hard. He doesn't like it when people make fun of me. I don't like it when people make fun of me when I ask for help. I get upset when I have to go back and erase things. I like to do art projects and I don't mind staying in for recess to do my work because I can get help with it. So this is all information that we've gathered from Sammy and that's huge. His student voice is now being added into the mix. All right, so we have a ton of data on Sammy. So we have to figure out how we're going to document this FBA data. So there are different ways that this can be documented. You can use the IEP system to document this assessment data or the evaluation piece that you pulled together on Sammy, or you can upload your completed like local school corporation forms. You may have a whole form that you have to go through and that can be uploaded into the document section of IEP, but there's 2 different ways. You can do it through the system or through your own forms. All right, so we're gonna review through this whole FBA process. We've gotten all of our data and we're coming together as a team. Remember, it's a whole team process. And we're discussing the data that we've gathered. It's a conversation so that we can all understand and take in those points of view. So we're going to discuss the analysis of his data and conclude it with a hypothesis of the function of behavior. So we're going to put those scientist caps on and figure out what we think is going on with the student. So when we talk about this behavior of concern, What data did we, that was either confirmed or identified that changed the behavior of concern? So we'll move into, then we look at those conditions. What factors may have led to this behavior? What actions or events make the behavior of concern more likely? What happens right before the behavior of concerns? If you're looking through that data set, or the multiple data sets that you were provided, there's a lot of information there that provides that about these types of questions. You should be able to answer it in this section. Then those conditions that maintain the behavior. Once we see that behavior happen, what occurs in the environment that reinforces it? So if Sammy's throwing his paper on the floor and crumpling it up, what reinforces that behavior? What is he getting out of that? And then we're looking at those related deficits, right? Is there a skill that they're missing? Do we need to provide some specially designed instruction to teach that skill, and some practice to help support them? So what is in, what is impacting, what skills does Sammy, sorry, I'm trying to get those words out. What skills does Sammy need, or what deficits does he have so that he's able to use that skill, or what does he need to learn a skill? So this is all a conversation that you'll have with the case conference team and discussing all this data. So then, because we're trying to figure out that function of the behavior, right? So there are 4 functions, right? Sensory, escape, attention from peer or adult, or tangible. What are they trying to get? This is the question that we're trying to answer by gathering all that data and having all these conversations with the case conference committee. Just gave you guys a ton of information. So feel free to drop in the chat if you have any questions or ideas. So we move into supporting or refuting our hypothesis. We take all this data together and we come up with our hypothesis. And I believe, Alisa, you put an example of a hypothesis, like, what would you say? Like, when
on the pen under X conditions, this is what's also in the IEP system.
Yes.
Under X conditions, Sammy is likely to do Y behavior for Z reasons.
Yes.
So it's an XYZ.
Yeah. So when we start with that hypothesis of the function of behavior, so when, under what conditions he does this, when, what behavior, and then we test it. We look at our data to make sure that it supports this hypothesis, right? And then if we're not sure, do we need more data? Does it actually support it? Or if it doesn't support it, what more data, what do we need to gather more data? Sorry about that. And what data is needed to support it? So it's very important that you discuss this, because if we don't have the right function of behavior identified, then we could be feeding the function as it was discussed earlier. All right. So now that we know the function, we are going to build a plan.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Alisa.
No, finish your thought.
Well, I was thinking, while you guys have taken in all that information, if you want to drop into the chat what you think the hypothesis of the function of behavior would be helpful. It'd just be nice to hear what you guys are thinking after taking in all that data about Sammy.
Yeah.
So,
or you could put it on the Padlet.
Oh yes. Oh, that's right.
We have a place on the Padlet. If you go back to our, where you can just add underneath that link where it asks you, what do you think? What is a potential function of behavior?
Yes.
Or Sammy's behavior in this particular instance.
So let me share that.
And you just click on the cross sign and add your comments there.
Yeah, if you go to the Padlet, the last section on there, it says, go ahead and put the function of behavior on there, and we can share it out and view those as we go.
What's going on with Sammy? What is he communicating?
Mhm. When do we see this behavior?
This is the time in the process where we just take
Ooh.
all of the suggestions that come. It's like we're just kind of, everybody's in, because we don't
Mhm.
know. We don't know until we take one of these hypotheses and kind of work with it.
Yeah.
So
We
we've
have,
got, yeah.
oh yeah, go. Oh, we've got one on there and it
Mhm.
says, when asked to do a new academic task, Sammy is likely to put his head down or crumple up his paper to seek adult attention or slash help on academic tasks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So he's asking for help. Probably not the way that we would like for him to do that, but that could be what his behavior is communicating.
Yeah.
What else? Any other ideas that come? Could he be avoiding work? Could he be, and it's not at this point, all ideas are kind of in.
Yeah.
We want to have as many potential hypotheses to consider, because we don't know for sure,
Yeah.
but we will certainly test and find out.
Yeah. And going back to those ABC observations of like what's happening.
Okay. Well, because we're going to quickly come
Yeah.
to the end of our time, while you're
Yes.
thinking about some other functions of the behavior, and I'm going to challenge you to get something on there so that we can do some more activities, and spread this out a little bit. But of course, the behavior intervention plan is referenced in Article 7, and there are different reasons when we're required to do one. It may be to develop or be developed or reviewed as part of a disciplinary process. It might also be that we've got a student like Sammy that this behavior is impeding his learning, and we need to kind of figure that out. There's also the time when you want to make sure that you take a look at a behavioral intervention plan whenever you receive a student into your school or your district that has a plan in place, because you're responsible for that plan if you accept it as written. So you might want to have a team, and many times that was one of my responsibilities, to review the the incoming student documents and then share that with the director and the school personnel. Is this a plan that we might want to keep in place, or do we need to make amendments so that we can support the student in our space? Because once we accept it, it's ours.
Right. And being mindful of not saying necessarily like we don't do that here, but how can we, it may be that you have to tweak the plan because your environment is different, but it's still providing that level of support that is outlined in what to meet the need of the student. So that we don't do that here is hard.
And that's not, that's not a
Yeah.
part of our vocabulary or our repertoire.
Yeah.
But when we talk about, creating this plan, the whole idea is the goal is for Sammy to learn function-based replacement behaviors. The function of his behavior is not necessarily the problem. It's, it's how he's how he's navigating that and what he's doing, because he has a need for something. There's a more appropriate way to get that need set for our setting. And that's what we have to make sure that we're focusing towards. And to do that, to learn this function-based replacement behavior, whichever it is that we land on as a team to work with them, or at least try, we're going to have to provide specially designed instruction, perhaps, providing accommodations, perhaps, or providing providing environmental supports. So any and all of those things may need to happen depending on where our student is in the learning curve of a skill that's more appropriate for our setting. He may have some experiences with other ways to do that, but it's expedient. It gets me what I want in the moment. This is where I'm going. Okay, we all tend to do that with that's human nature. but maybe
Right.
that's not okay for the school setting. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on as we create our plan.
Yeah. Alisa, we've had a few more additions to the function of behavior. A lot of them, or a few of them, are very similar to help on it. I know that someone said to escape those difficult tasks, they identified the same behaviors. The last one I see on there is when given an academic task, Sammy perceives to be challenging within a large group setting. He engages in avoidance behaviors, a nurse visit, head down, destruction of academic tasks to reduce the internalized feelings of shame associated with academic work. I've not heard that one before.
It may be more about the attention that he doesn't want from peers and others than anything else. It may not be he's trying to avoid the work. It's just, it's painful. It's, I don't want this kind of attention and I don't know how to avoid it any other way.
Yeah. I want help, but I don't want to ask in front of others.
So, given that is a hypothesis to carry forward, keep those in mind, because your team's going to have to go down one path, if not both, to kind of determine, so what's, where do we go from here? And we've got to think about what's the most important thing for Sammy to be able to do. And I love the way that we've had consultants working with us that talk about what's life-changing for that student. If they could just do this, they could get beyond this particular situation. What would be important for Sammy to be able to learn to do? And what I'm going to challenge you to do is just, choose either one of those hypotheses, or there may be a third one posted up there now. But what would be a replacement behavior, skills that Sammy could be taught, instead of crumpling up things, putting his head down, ending up outside of class, missing recess, which he probably needs as well. What could he do instead? Okay, how can we then, if we identify some replacement behavior, some skills for him to learn, how can we support him learning those with accommodations or environmental supports, something to help him continue to grow in that skill set? And I always think of this as when I was teaching mathematics and I had students that were learning place value, and they could kind of get the addition thing or the subtraction thing, but their paper was a mess. So we would use the grid paper and say, these are the ones, these are the tens, these are the hundreds. As soon as we kind of set it up that way, they could do the math. Maybe Sammy needs a grid paper over his life to allow him to, maybe not, but, the idea is just, what could support Sammy in developing other skills to ask for help, or to say, or to speak up when he needs, to advocate for himself. Okay. And whatever ideas and supports that our team comes up with, we need to be able to match them back to, we know this because this was what Sammy's data said. It's not just because this is my favorite intervention to use and I just want to use it one more time. This has to match up to Sammy's needs, and his data should reflect that this would be a next step in his learning cycle. There's also the importance of specially designed instruction. Many times we're quick to throw accommodations and supports into place, but we're not teaching the skills any longer. And that's one of the tenets of special education services, is that we provide that specially designed instruction, the content, the methods, instructional delivery to address the unique needs of students. It's great for Sammy to no longer tear things up and throw them on the floor, but can we help him learn some skills to regulate himself better so that he's not doing the tearing up and throwing up? It shouldn't be because of fear that he's going to get in trouble with Mrs. Stovall. He needs to learn what do I do with these feelings? What do I do with this anxiety that doesn't end up with self-destruction, removing me from class and instruction, or that anxious feeling that I end up with the rest of the day. So there's a responsibility to consider, is there a need for specially designed instruction within the supports that we're going to give the student? And I would submit that we could default to a yes, even if it was short term, just to make sure he's got a skill that he needs to build upon. And you can push back on that if you want to, but
No, I mean, behavior, like some kids we know pick up on academics quickly and they don't need support. Some kids pick up on behavior quickly and they know exactly what they're supposed to do. But we know for our kiddos that don't pick up on some academic things, we teach them, we find ways to meet their needs, and behavior is the same way. We figure out how do we need to design instruction to support that student. So just because it's not academic, we still have to teach it, because not all of our kids are picking up on those just general tier 1 type of support.
And for behavioral skills, we lead with instruction. We should
Yes.
always lead with instruction. I will never assume that you've got it until I see it, until you show me that, that you can use it and do it. And it may be more like coaching than teaching, because they got parts of the skill that they do quite well, but we've got to fine tune it so that we've got a student that can manage themselves and their behavioral decision making, so that they are able to stay in instruction. Because I keep coming back to that word instruction, because we do school, and that's the whole focus. We want to provide students with skills, and if there's a barrier to that, we have a responsibility for those that have IEPs to work through that with them and provide them with the skills that they need, or accommodations. And the next few slides that you see are just examples of ways to provide access through accommodations. The level of support that you provide. Some kids just need someone watching them do the task. Some need to have a verbal support as they're being watched. Some need a hand under their elbow to help them get started. Others need more physical supports to do things. But what's the level of support that could help Sammy? Where is he in that? How are we inputting information, and how are we expecting him to show what he knows and can do? Okay, what about pacing? What about use of pictures or objects or nonverbals? There are all types of environmental skills and supports that we might be able to provide. And we have to think again through the lens of Sammy. What are Sammy's needs? And if we do all this work, we may not get it right in the first round or the second round. Or this may be behavior that is so entrenched in Sammy that he's going to hang on to it. It is working for him. And so we're going to have to help him learn to shift that to something that in our space, in the learning community, in a classroom, in a school, the things you're doing are counterproductive to your learning. You may be able to exit stage left somewhere else, at home, or go outside in the backyard, or remove yourself, or wait until it's quieter to ask a question and not feel so embarrassed about it. But that can't always happen in the school. So we're going to equip this young man with skills that can carry him forward.
Yeah.
So are there any suggestions for, what kind of skills you want to address? I'm not looking at the.
Yeah, there's so I've got there's quite a few on here. You guys have really been adding quite a bit. Asking for a break, signaling frustration, like in some way. So they put on like a Post-it note, or writing a question on his paper.
Nonverbal signals, I see.
Yeah.
Cue cards, some personal cue cards.
Yeah.
Teacher checks.
Yeah.
Okay. Post-it or small, and to get the teacher attention. Okay. Yeah. You've got a scheduled time, to meet me in my office, and we can talk about, whatever. And maybe have office hours for all of your students. And all the slots are full for today. I had 5 slots, but I've got you on the top of the list tomorrow, Sammy. So, if you've got a question that we can address then, that's the way life works. And sometimes you have to have wait time and so on. So, but those are kind of building life skills in addition to learning skills. Okay, fantastic. One of the other critical pieces of this whole process is creating the plan that's actually implemented, because we do good things around the table, and then we get out of the meeting and back into our daily routines and classrooms and such, and it's really hard to make sure all the moving parts get done. So we want to make sure that part of this learning function-based behaviors is implementing those interventions, and then monitoring the fidelity of instruction. as well as documenting progress. And you can go ahead and move to the next slide, because there's
Sorry.
information there that, just some prompts. Who's going to be responsible for teaching Sammy the replacement skills? That's something, we may say, oh, it's going to be the teacher of record, because it just always is. Who is the best equipped person to do that may already be teaching those skills to someone else? That's allowed. We can do those, using our staff. There may be a small group of students that are working on the skills of asking for help, and what do I do with my frustration. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for Sammy. If there's a group of peers that are already doing those kinds of activities, it might be appropriate for him to be a part of that group. Okay.
Yeah,
Collecting,
on that team, right?
Absolutely, leaning on your team. Okay, who's going to collect and document Sammy's progress? That's a lot of different moving parts. There may be teachers that, other than Mr. Kennett, that are seeing the same behaviors, or maybe they're not. So let's find out how he's doing in learning these new skills that we've started to teach him across those environments. Where's the best place to see him use those skills? Figure out a couple of places where that could happen. Okay. And then who's going to be responsible for making sure that whatever environmental supports that we're talking that are going to be around Sammy, that they are actually shared out with the staff members that need to know that it's critical to know. Okay, and that can be documented in the IEP. We've got some forms that we've developed that, it doesn't have to be an IEP team. It can just be, a team made up of school personnel and families. Who's going to do what to support the student, and embedding whatever it is, the grid paper that needs to be around Sammy as he learns these new skills. And I think there's something that's in the chat log, or maybe it's a.
Oh, I put it on there. Just
oh, okay. I didn't know if there's another comment. Okay. And what other people need to know? Others that work with Sammy. How does that information get shared out? Because all these moving pieces have to move in concert to be a support for Sammy. And documenting in the IEP is going to be critical. There's actually a place, if you move to the next slide.
Yes, sorry about
there's
that.
Actually a place in the IEP system where actually the first, where the arrow is, that's if anytime there's a revision made to this IEP, there should always be the thought process of, does this somehow touch the behavior intervention supports that we're providing for Sammy? Hopefully the answer is no, and so you can check that box. We're going to just continue implementing this IEP as it's written, and the behavior plan as well. Or if there's some adjustments that need to be made, we've got schedule changes, and that may interfere with the times that he was doing certain activities or receiving certain supports. Just to be aware. And of course, there should be a goal written, a measurable goal related to the learning of the new skills, so that we can know whether or not he's making progress.
Yeah.
Is there a question? How often do we need to redo? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, your data should tell you that.
Yeah.
I mean, if things blow up in a big way, it's pretty clear that we've got to go back. But we should be monitoring the progress, and that's just a perfect question to ask as we get to this last page. Because if Sammy's not making progress in his skills, we need to review the plan. We need to check for the fidelity of instruction, or the rate of positive feedback. That's critical. We've got to know we're doing it right and doing it well. Okay. Is this an instructional match to the student? Is it just something's just not not working, and we need to make an adjustment to the plan? Okay, that kids are individuals, and the best laid plan may not work, or we may be off on our hypothesis. Which that's why I always encourage a team to keep the ones you don't select for a while, because it may be that there's a little bit of growth, and then we plateau again, and we've got to readjust.
Yeah. And fidelity is huge, because if we've got a great plan, but if we're not implementing the pieces of it, then, and we're like, it's not working, but if we haven't been implementing it, do we know if it's not working? So,
And yep. And if you're not taking data, and if you walked into my office, I would say if you don't have any data, then that means you're starting at ground zero again, aren't you? You know, it may be working, but if there's no evidence that you have, you know, you have to document what you're doing and progress monitor. That's
And-
just a part of it. That gives us information.
and that goes back to the beginning of the process, like coming in and saying, we've got these environmental supports, we've got these interventions, these supports that we put in, here's all this data, I don't know what's going on. So it's throughout the whole process that we're bringing data to support the reason to do an FBA, to change the BIP, to add in certain supports, to take away certain supports. So that data piece is huge. And, you know, like Alisa said, Caroline, it's when the data isn't adding up and we're not seeing gains and the function has changed, that's when you have that conversation with your team, but making sure that you've got data that's driving all of this.
Mm-hmm. If Sammy's making progress and it's slower than we anticipated, but we're chugging along, then we keep doing what we're doing and continue to monitor.
Yeah.
And this does happen. Sammy can reach the anticipated level of mastery and generalize the skill. Lots of kids do. We work hard and we celebrate. We have to celebrate those things for our sake as well as the students. Document that skill growth. Go into the system, and when you it's official, you can discontinue a behavior intervention plan. There's a way to do that in the system. If you're using the IEP system, and celebrate, find a way to just celebrate, because it's worthy. It's worthy. The work you've done, the work the student has done.
Yeah, celebrate amongst your team, celebrate with that student. You're affirming that they're making progress. They know that they're moving forward. They're setting those, they're meeting even those short-term goals. And we do that with every age level. So celebrations with elementary, it's going to look very different from celebrations with high school, but affirming that process or that progress is huge.
And even with those littles, I went into a classroom and the little girl said, I'm trying to make my line go up. And she was so proud. And that's all she needed to know. She was working hard to, it was some vocabulary and some things she was learning. But she knew that when her line went up, she was improving and she was learning. And she was so proud of that. And it's like, yes, even kindergartners, little ones can understand that I'm trying to improve and get better. I'm becoming a better student, a better individual. And we can bank on that.
And teaching, that's like self-monitoring skills that we're teaching, Yes. All right. So, you ready for the last one?
Yeah. Right. We have given you, and bless you for being in the short session of all of this information. There are lots of resources on the Padlet. So when you have an opportunity, take a look. If you have questions about any of them, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and ask. We would appreciate your feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what other questions you have. If you need more information in any way, don't hesitate to contact us.
Our contact info is at the end of this presentation, but you can also go to our website, and Alisa and our names are on there. But we can help, and
be happy to do that. We appreciate that you've taken time away from everything else that's going on in your school world and beyond. You honor us with your presence, and we do want to support and provide you with information that can help you do the work that you do every day. So thank you for that, and have a good week. Have a good, it's still Monday. And you know where to find us.
Yes. And if you don't have time to complete the evaluation now, you can go to the Padlet, and this QR code is in the presentation that's on the Padlet. And you can, the email that we sent Friday, Alisa and I are both on that. You're more than welcome to reply to that. We can, if you need more help with anything like that, we're happy to support you. But thank you for spending time with us today.
Yes. And there will be a clock hours sent out to each each individual that participated. So you'll have that if you need
Yeah.
it. Thank you. Take good care
Yeah.
and let us hear from you.